You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the Okayest Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
Hey there, everybody. Derek here from the Dropping Pins podcast, hosted by the Okayest Hunter podcast network. We missed the week last week, so I'm real sorry about that. I did not have a Dropping Pins podcast pre-recorded and ready to launch for our normal Monday launch day. Greg and I had gone to Oregon on our blacktail hunt. If you have not caught that story, Eric and I sat down last night and recorded an episode on the Okayest Hunter podcast. That was basically a recap of the Oregon hunt, which was absolutely awesome. It was everything we hoped for and a whole lot more. So if you haven't checked that out, I recommend checking that out, or shoot myself or Greg a message on social media. We'd be happy to chat with you about it if that's something that kind of interests you. But I didn't have an episode ready to go, so nothing was posted. We were in Oregon for a week, so that was my bad. Sorry about that. If you were awaiting an episode, I didn't have anything for you, but this week I do have an episode for you, and it's just jolly old me. So I've got a story or two that I kind of have been thinking about lately with a hunt coming up. I know I just got back from one on Monday night, and now it's Wednesday today. I'm leaving on Friday after work just for a quick 4-day long weekend hunt with a couple of buddies down to the public lands in Illinois. And we're going to chase, hopefully, some big old whitetail. So in the preparation for our our Illinois hunt, I've been hemming and hawing and thinking and all the planning that you do before you go on a hunt. You get excited. And me and Adam and Dave have just been going back and forth with this and that, and where should we go? And if the wind does this, where will we be? And as we're kind of thinking about spots, it got me thinking about some previous places and some, I don't want to say strategies, but tendencies that hunters tend to fall in. And that's what I wanted to share tonight, was a little bit of some tendencies that maybe can help you, or on the other end of the spectrum, some tendencies that can definitely hurt hunters. And it all depends on whatever. And what I mean by that is, sometimes what I'm going to talk about tonight, it works really, really well and it's going to pay off for you. And sometimes it is going to leave you deerless, buckless, and in the barren woods. And the tendency that I'm kind of talking about, and one that's got in my mind the last week or two as we're preparing for this hunt, is the tendency for people to go back to familiar places. The mobile hunting craze has really picked up over the last 5 years. Mobile hunting is something that my family and I have been doing for a long, long time on the public lands in northeastern Wisconsin, up in the National Forest, and really over the last 10 or 12 years, with mobile hang-on stands. Up north, we use a lot of climbers, a lot of like lock-on stands. And lately, well, the last 10 or 12 years have had some nice mobile setups, and I've really been mobile. So exploring new places has never been easier. And with the heavy use of cell cams and SD card cams, people have been exploring more and more places. But even though it's been easier to explore new places, as human beings, we tend to fall back to things that are comfortable, things that are easy, things that we know. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And the whole reason for it is, planning for this Illinois hunt, we have areas that we have scouted. And I've got cameras down there. I've got a couple cell cameras down there. And I've got some places I've been looking at for 3 years that I've scouted, that I've shed hunted. And those places are burning in my mind. We're going down there in a couple of days, and those are the spots that I just keep coming back to, because in my mind, they're good spots, because I found big sheds, or I got pictures of a big one there. And really what a guy has to do is pay attention to what's happening there now, and not that historical stuff. or do you have to pay attention to the historical stuff? So that kind of hemming and hawing is what I wanted to talk about today. And I've got two stories that I want to share, and they they kind of work in contradicting orders, I guess. But I wanted to share them, and hopefully you can pull something out of it. And more than just the hunting the historical areas, they're stories that I learned a lot from. um, and I've got two successful stories and one non-successful story. So I'm going to kick it off. Now you know the topic of what I'm kind of going for tonight. The first story that I wanted to share was one of the first mature deer I ever took with a bow and arrow, and that was up in the Nicolay National Forest. My dad had found a spot, I believe, when I was 12 years old. He had done some scouting. I'd already shot a buck with my bow and arrow that year. Pretty lucky. My dad had me on deer, and I had multiple chances. Got on a buck, shot a buck with my bow, which was pretty amazing in October. And then we were preparing for gun season, and my dad found a great little escape route. There was a finger of cedar swamp that went out into some hardwoods, kind of led up a valley, and there was some good buck sign in the area on the edge of this big swamp. And we set up right where that finger kind of came out of the swamp, and it started to get narrower. And we had seen some hunter sign from other people who were hunting up on the hardwood ridges. So I think what my dad was going for was this is an escape route. It's going to be where the deer get pressured from the roads up above and they come down to find sanctuary in the swamp. So we had found the spot. We had hunted it for a couple of years. My dad actually shot one of his biggest bucks ever that opening morning when I was 12. And we hunted that spot for a number of years, both bow and gun. It always seemed to hold deer. And one thing that I've always noticed in this spot is it seems that as soon as November kicked off, like November 5th and on, many times, not every time, but many times when I hunted there, it was a place that I would see bucks harassing does, chasing does, all on this hillside. And eventually those does would push down toward the swamp. But it was a place that I think because it was just a good travel corridor, does were moving along the edge of the swamp and funneling off of that point. The bucks knew that it was a good place to cross trails, smell, scent check for does, and try to pick up a doe at the beginning of the rut there. So over the years, I had seen that. I'd seen multiple bucks chasing does all over that hillside. Had never shot one doing that because that was during bow. Never shot one doing that, but always saw it. And it had been a few years. We kind of just, I don't know. I think my dad maybe hunted the spot a couple times during bow season, but I had been in college and I hadn't been up there and hunted that spot for a while. I'd say probably for like 3 years. And I went up to the cabin for a weekend by myself. It was the weekend before gun season. And I had just those 2 days left to bow. It was a Saturday and a Sunday. And I think I hunted Saturday. I don't remember where I went, but I didn't have any action, nothing. So Sunday was pretty much my last day to hunt, and it was going to be a really cold, rainy, nasty morning. And I was mulling over where to go. I hadn't done a ton of scouting up there, and I thought, geez, it was November 13th. And in my mind, I just said, it's November 13th. Where have you seen bucks on does? Where have you seen bucks chase does previously? And that was the first place that came to mind. I was like, oh, yeah, that finger of the swamp on that ridge. That maybe I should just go throw a blind sit there. Haven't scouted it at all. There's usually deer in there. I've always noticed chasing. Let's go check that spot out. So in my mind, I had a spot that I kind of wanted to set up. There was a little pothole about 80 yards from the edge of that finger. So it's like a cedar swamp comes into a little finger that kind of turns into a mix of cedars and spruce, and it's just kind of low and thick. And then about 80 yards outside of the swamp at the bottom of the valley there's like a little swale grass pothole, maybe 80 yards across, 60 yards wide, tall yellow swale grass. And the deer kind of always skirted that or worked through the middle of that. So I thought, boy, if I got right between that swale grass and I got between swale grass and that edge of that finger, that would be a great little funnel. Should get some travel through there. So that was kind of my goal. Wake up in the morning, and of course, it's like sleeting, spitting rain. It's like 35 degrees, just nasty. So I put on the best clothes I had for that, and I took my, I think I was in a climber that day. Yeah, I was in a climber because I remember the only tree I could get up was a cherry tree and black cherry, and it had that loud, shaggy bark. And thank goodness there was rain. I remember thinking that because those are the loudest trees in the world to climb with a climbing tree stand because it gets snagged on everything. So thank goodness it was rainy. But before I ever made it to the tree, I was walking down the ridge in the dark with my headlamp, and I'm making my way there, and it's spitting rain. I'm getting all wet, and just watching up ahead of me, and we have some. There was some tacks that went back there. My dad had put tacks from when we gun hunted back there. A bunch of the tacks were still up, so I'm walking down, and I'm getting what I think is close to the edge of the swamp, and all of a sudden I catch a tack that just looks a little bit different. I was like, all right, that might be a deer. So I kind of pointed my headlamp down a little bit. And I just kept my eyes on it. And it had both of its eyes just locked in on me. And I was like, okay, that's definitely a deer. So I was just watching it. About 10 seconds later, I saw another set of eyes rise up about a foot higher than the first one. And that one was behaving a little bit differently, looking around and just moving its head about, put its head down. And that doe was just fixated on me. And I was like, geez, I think that's a doe with a great big buck that's on her. This is what I'm thinking in my mind. They're only like 12 yards away. So eventually she kind of gets spooky from me standing there with my headlamp on her. And she just kind of walks away along the edge of the swamp. And that's when I see him turn his head and I can see a great big set of antlers on him. And he's right on her. And I was like, holy crap, that was cool. But now I know no matter where I set up, I have to be within shooting distance of this doe's trail. Because if that doe is hot and that big buck is on her, there's probably going to be other bucks. So luckily, I was fairly close to where I wanted to be anyway. I was close to the edge of the swamp. I got maybe 50 yards from the edge of the swale grass. I was closer to the edge of the swamp, but I was about 15 yards from where that doe and buck had worked through. So it was still dark. They worked through. I picked my tree, got up in that cherry tree, took my time climbing, climbed up there, got in the stand. I might actually brought one of those packable umbrellas, tree stand umbrella, that goes into the tree above you. You wrap the thing around the tree, try to stay dry because it was spitting rain so much. And so I sat down, and as it got light, I sat for maybe 45 minutes, and all of a sudden I caught movement along the edge of the swale grass coming my way, and it was a buck. And I was watching him, and it's pretty small, and he came down the edge of the swale grass, crossed right in front of me, perfect, right across this little lane, about 18 yards, and he had his nose to the ground, and he was smelling that doe's trail, and he walked right where I saw those two. And the last day of bow season for me until late season, you think I would have pulled back my bow and shot that guy, but I just passed him. I don't know. I just had a good feeling about that, having that hot doe go through. I just had a feeling to just wait, and who knows what else is going to come. If you only waited 45 minutes and this first buck already came, who knows? So he worked that area, and I thought, well, now I know exactly where the doe went because he had his nose down. He followed her. I know exactly where any other deer are going to come. So he works off. I sat for maybe another hour, and I started to get wet back. I had my tether, or like for my safety harness, was attached to the tree, and it was, the cord goes down and went down the back of my jacket and attached to my safety vest that was under my jacket. And what was happening is all that rain was coming down the tree and following that strap right into my jacket. So I was starting to get wet. So I stood up, turned around, faced the tree, and I was messing with the umbrella. And they have like two cords that go behind the tree. Then you tie them nice and tight, and all the water was leaking down the umbrella right down my safety harness strap. So I'm futzing with that and try to retie it and move it so that the water wouldn't be coming down. And I messed with it for like what felt like forever, um, maybe like a couple minutes. And I got done, and I just had this eerie feeling. So I just kind of like put my arms down real slow, slowly turned in my stand to face the way I was facing. And I turned all the way around, and I'm looking out. And what do I see? right in that swale grass swamp, right where the 6-pointer came from, I can just see a frame with big brow tines, and it's coming right for me. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I immediately go to reach, grab my bow, and that buck is just cruising, nose toward the ground. He's just doing the rut trot, and he's coming right toward me. By the time I grab my bow, clip my release on, he's probably 25 yards, right on the same trail as that 6-pointer, which was, I'm assuming, the same trail that doe took. I clipped that release on. Immediately, I drew back. He came across the shooting lane at 18 yards. I grunt stopped him. He locked up looking for a deer, and I put one right through the shoulder, low shoulder, and it just zipped right through him. He ran about 65 yards into the finger of that swamp, and then I heard a crash, and the woods was quiet. And it was one of the coolest feelings ever. It was like, holy cow, it actually worked. Went in blind with the idea that this is typically a rut cruising spot, and saw a doe in the dark with what I thought was a buck set up on the trail. 2 bucks come in, and I just shot a bruiser buck. I couldn't believe it worked. Um, so that was pretty darn awesome. I ended up calling my mom. She was in Green Bay. Told her I shot a big one. She said, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna come see it. I'll come help you." So I actually went back to the cabin, got on some different clothes, and I think I had an old fashioned at like 9:30, 10 in the morning while I was waiting for her. And she got up there and we went and found him. And I didn't go look at him right away. I waited for my mom to get up to go find him. And he ended up being a 7-pointer. It's actually this one right over here. He only had 7 points. Big brow tines. He dressed 217 pounds on November 13th. So big, mature old buck, just kind of a scrubby rack. But that example right there is kind of using your historical knowledge of what deer do in areas at a certain time of the year. And that's an example that absolutely worked out. So that spot in my mind was rut cruising spot. It was rut. I hadn't been having luck. So I just went to what I knew was a rut cruising spot and got lucky to see that doe. And so I knew where to set up, and it all worked out. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. You need to have that historical information, those previous years of knowledge of scouting, of hunting that area, so you have an idea generally what the deer are going to do. Now, it's not going to work every time because every year is different. Food patterns, oaks, mass crops, all those things change. But if you have areas over the years that consistently show some sort of early season movement, late season movement, mid-October movement, some sort of pattern, sometimes it does work great to capitalize on those things. And in that story, it worked out wonderfully. Now, I've got lots of stories where that doesn't work out. And actually, my best bow buck from the national forest up north is one of those that didn't work out for me at all. And it was all credited to my dad. This buck that's right here over my left shoulder is a deer that my dad and I followed for 5 years. That buck and another buck that we called Ice Pick. This one we had named Curly because his brow tines curl outward. We got in trail cam pictures of him for 5 seasons. So since he was 2.5, we had pictures of him. And every year you could see he had the same frame, and he always hung out with this other buck in the summertime. And we get pictures of them in this cool cedar swamp all summer. Both those bucks hung out together for 5 years. Sometimes they'd have smaller ones with them, but it was mostly those two. And they'd always be cruising through the cedar swamp in the summer months in velvet. And finally, that 5th year, I looked at my dad and I said, "What in the hell are we doing? We get pictures of these deer every summer, and then we just kind of like let them go, like not intentionally. We're not like passing them. They're huge. We want to shoot them, but we don't really like put in a lot of effort to figure them out." I was like, "Yeah, we like getting the summer trail cam pictures. Dad, let's figure these deer out and kill them. We've had them forever. We got to figure them out." So we kind of devised this plan where we were going to focus in on this one area with our trail cams. It's an area we knew pretty well. We had done some shed hunting in there. My mom and I found a couple really nice sets of sheds, we actually found both sheds off of that buck. They're hanging right there. The season before, my wife found one, my dad found one. And then my mom and dad each found a shed apiece from that Ice Pick buck, which was an older buck, but was an 8-pointer. So we devised this plan that we were going to move all of our cameras, and this is before cell cams. We just had a bunch of SD cams. We're going to move a whole bunch of cameras into this area, just kind of cover the area in spots we thought were good and try to figure these deer out. And it was working really well. Like I said, we knew the area, so we knew a lot of these little travel points that bucks like to use. They were showing up on cameras, on multiple cameras, multiple times. So we were feeling pretty good, pretty positive about it. Holy cow, we might have a chance at these guys. We're kind of figuring them out. They had kind of split up and done their own thing once Velvet came off. So my dad was kind of onto that ice pick buck in one area, and I was getting more pictures of Curly, this buck, in a different area further to the northeast. And so season's going on. We're checking cameras whenever I go up to the cabin, and I get a little long weekend hunt at the very end of October. And in my mind, it's like, this is when we're going to kill them. We're going to find some big sign. We kind of know the areas they're at. We're going to find some big sign. We're going to set up and we're going to get them in that pre-rut phase where these bucks are laying down sign. They're very, I don't want to say predictable, but once they lay down that sign, you can kind of gather some immediate intel and make some good moves on them. So I thought, this is going to be it. We had some nice weather. This is going to be it. So I got up there. I went and hunted a spot kind of blind in the morning. And I definitely didn't see him. I don't remember if I saw any other deer, but that's the deer I was looking for. So it didn't really matter. I didn't see him. I got down and then I had like 3 or 4 cameras that were in the area that I wanted to go check. So I was really excited to go check the cameras. So I went, pulled the cards, ran back to the cabin because I didn't have any kind of card reader. We had a little laptop at the cabin, threw these cards in, and I was just immediately just deflated. Like it just took the wind out of my sails. I'd gotten Curly on, I think, 3 out of the 4 cameras within the last week that I was hunting. But all of the pictures were at midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, like middle of the night. So immediately I was just absolutely deflated and like, here are these spots I thought were going to be the money spots. He's getting to him at midnight. That means he's not bedding close to here. It means I have no chance of hunting him in daylight in any of these spots I thought were good. So the problem with that was I should have been looking at that information through a different lens. I should have been seeing that as a positive, that he was in the area, that I didn't know where he was still traveling, that he was still alive, that I did get intel. But no, the reason I was feeling so deflated is because in my mind, I had built up these spots that I liked, that in my mind were the good spots, instead of letting the deer tell me where to hunt. And that's where my dad comes into the equation, because here I am all bummed out. It doesn't even pay to hunt. I remember saying that. I'm not even going to hunt because he's not going to show up in daylight. So instead of kind of just taking the bull by the horns and being like, all right, we know he's in the area, I'm going to go find him. I had already been so married to these spots mentally that this is where I'm going to get them. And I tend to do this a lot because I love the scouting aspect of hunting. It's my favorite aspect. So when I find these little nooks and crannies, these weird little spots, I get really excited about them. And in my mind, I just kind of get wrapped around them too much, where I think they're going to work instead of just going, well, let the deer tell me where to hunt. And that's exactly what happened with this buck. So I was married to these spots. It wasn't working out with the cameras there. And I was all pissy and being kind of a little biatch. And my dad says, hey, don't worry about it. I just went and scouted a different spot not too far away. And there's a really good rub line over there. And there were some acorns. Why don't we just go over there and hunt? I don't have any cameras over there. Let's just go try over there. And I think I was still being pissy about it. And I said something like, okay, well, whatever. I'll go. And, I was being a little prima donna there. And so we got ready. And he said, no, it actually looks really good over there. There's a bunch of acorns. Looks like there's a bunch of deer. And there's some really good rubs over there. He said, I even think I found a spot where 2 bucks might have been fighting. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Okay. So he kind of had me interested, and it wasn't terribly far from where we had been hunting these 2 bucks, but it was in an area that we had just never walked in from there before. So we'd never walked this one ridge. It's kind of further southwest than any of the stuff we knew those bucks were using. So I was like, there's a chance we could see something nice tonight. The weather was still good. So we went out for an afternoon hunt. I took my mobile stand with some climbing sticks, and my dad took his climber. And we walked in onto this big oak ridge, and he took me to the spot where he thought these two bucks were fighting, which was in the open hardwoods. So I'm assuming it was at night, but I mean, the area was really ripped up. It was a pretty big area, size of like maybe a family room, dining room, kitchen, like 50 yards, 40 yards. And it was just all mushed up, big tracks, and all around it there's, rubs and scrapes and stuff. And I was like, oh, dang, this does look like there's a couple good deer tussling. And he's like, yeah, and then right over here, there's a rub line. So we walked over there, and there's one real big rub, but you could see a couple rubs heading over this oak ridge toward the valley on the other side, which is all loaded with spruce. It's real thick, bunch of blowdowns and stuff. So my dad said, well, if you want to take the south side of this rub line, and then he was going to go up a little bit further north, where the ridge kind of came together, and then there was a hillside that had a bunch of real big oaks, and it was kind of a little bit more open with young spruce. And he said he found some really good rub line coming out there. So he was going to hunt there. He said, you hunt over here where this buck fight was, just set up wherever you think. And that day, I remember we had like a northeast wind. So the ridge kind of runs north-south. So the wind's coming out of the northeast. We came from the south, walking into the wind, and we kind of walked in on the east side of the ridge, kind of assuming that the deer were going to be on the west side. And I remember walking about 15 yards south of this rub line that ran east-west over the top of the ridge. And I got close to the edge of the woods where it started to get thicker as the hillside starts dropping off into some spruce. I saw that rub line kind of heading down in there. I remember thinking, I definitely want to set up on this rub line. There was acorns the whole way. But the wind was kind of the problem because the edge of the thicker spruce runs north-south, and that wind is blowing a little bit towards that edge from the northeast to the southwest. So I thought, well, shoot, something comes out south of me, it's going to smell me before I ever get a shot at it. And so what I ended up doing was I had some Wags doe and estrus scent. And Wags is a company out of Appleton, actually. Nick Wagner owns it. Real nice guy. Talked to him a couple times. Used to use the Wags a lot. If you're looking for some fresh scent, I highly recommend it. But I had some of that. So what I did is I walked to the edge of the spruce real quick, and I just sprayed one of the rubs real good with that doe and estrus. And then I walked back about 25 yards to the tree that I was going to hunt. So I sprayed my doe and estrus just to the west of where I was. And the whole idea was, with the northeast wind and that scent being a little bit further west of me, if anything came out downwind of me, before it hit my scent, I was hoping it would hit that doe and estrus and then work straight up into the wind with that doe and estrus in its nose and follow that edge and pull it right past me. So that was kind of my mindset. But I also thought they could just come out on this rub line and work right to me. So it could work out either way. It was kind of just a precaution. So throw my climbing sticks up, put my stand up, I'm sitting there, and didn't see any deer for a while. And maybe about 30 minutes before dark, all of a sudden I could hear something crunching in the leaves behind me, downwind of me, to the south of me. And so I'm turning around and I'm trying to look through these spruce trees, and I can just see a big deer just pawing up ground at a scrape about 70 yards away. And this deer looks like he is digging a tunnel to China. He has his head down, leaves are flying in the air, dirt's flying, and he just doesn't stop. It's like he's just digging a hole. This thing is just ripping it up. And I was like, well, geez, I can't even see antlers yet, but this is probably a shooter. I mean, this seems like an aggressive, big old buck. And then it kind of clicks like, hey, there was that spot where those bucks were fighting. This is probably the dominant buck that won that fight. And he's coming out and just announcing right on the edge of this oak flat. He's announcing, hey, I'm here. Don't mess with me. Check this out. And he's just ripping it up. And I'm like, holy crap, I think this is a big one. So he's ripping up that scrape, and all of a sudden he takes a couple of steps to his east, coming close to where my wind is blowing. And I got really nervous. So I took out my grunt call. I faced it straight to the west of me toward where I sprayed that scent. And I just gave 2 real low, real short, real soft grunts. Brr, brr. And that buck whipped his head over, started walking straight toward the grunt into the wind, and he was very, very close to catching my wind. It was just off. But I think what happened is as he cut that way, I think he caught a whiff of that doe and estrus. And all of a sudden he kind of lip curled, and then he just started coming. So I was like, holy crap, this deer's coming. And at this point I can see he's got a wide rack. I'm shooting it for sure. So he starts coming toward me. He's like quartering toward me, walking. And all of a sudden he gets to about 30 yards and he kind of turns a little bit toward the north, which slowly like makes him a little bit more broadside. And I clipped my release on, drew back when he went behind a spruce tree. He popped out and he was still coming toward me. And I think my mouth stopped him. I just, and he stopped and he was quartering to pretty good. So I held it right kind of on that front shoulder, and I touched it off, heard the arrow smash into him. It was loud, hit the shoulder. He turned and ran. I could see arrow sticking out, turned and ran straight back downhill into those spruces that he came from. I knew there wasn't going to be much blood with a high shoulder shot, quartering to. My arrow did not pass through, so we elected to wait till the next day to track him. Coyotes were howling when we left, and that tore me up. Just tore me up that those coyotes were howling like they were. But my dad said, "Hey, we gotta back out. There's no way we're gonna be able to find blood in the dark. We have to back out." So we backed out, and the next day it actually worked out really well because my mom and my fiance at the time, now my wife Ashley, we all went out to track together, and we ended up finding the buck maybe 150 yards down the hill. Very, very, very little blood. Actually, the only blood we found was like mists of blood where it was coming out of his nose because there was no exit and the entry was high. My mom spotted him first. We found him. Big old buck, 6.5-year-old buck, big giant buck there. Probably the crowning moment of my bow hunting career after knowing that buck for so long. And the crowning moment of my career, my dad put me on him by scouting fresh sign. Here I thought I had all these spots. I knew this deer, had scouted this area more than any other area I'd probably ever scouted. But I got married to all these spots that I thought were going to be the spot. And I just kind of closed my mind off to the possibility that he'd be somewhere else. He was in another oak ridge, totally not even, in the immediate area of where I thought he was going to be. So you can't marry yourself to these spots that that you are comfortable with, that you've planned. Sometimes they work, like in the first story, that worked. Yay. And then I never would have saw that deer. If I would have just hunted the spots that I thought were going to work out and that I was already pre-planning in my head how it's all going to happen, never ever would have saw it. If it wasn't for my dad taking a walk in a different area and going, "Hey, found some fresh sign. It looks really good. You should come hunt it with me." Went and hunted, hung them blind, and just got super lucky that deer walked out and it happened to be the deer that we had been chasing. So that's kind of the two stories I wanted to illustrate there. Both ended in a kill, but one of them absolutely would never have happened if my dad hadn't been out scouting for hot sign. So as I go into this planning for our Illinois hunt here, kind of asking myself, do I go and hunt spots that I've got pre-planned where I know the tree, where I know the area? Or in the afternoon hunts, should I just be scouting with a stand on my back, find fresh signs, set up, and see what happens? That's what's been going through my mind a lot. I like both ways. I just don't want to get tied to a spot. It's a 4-day hunt. If I tie myself to 2 or 3 different spots, I could really be shooting myself in the foot. So I gotta do some scouting around, see what the sign looks like, because I've definitely done that before, even after being successful in a few spots. I had a spot that I hunted for 2 gun seasons on opening weekends, and I passed 2 bucks from that spot. I ended up shooting a 10-pointer in that spot. Great spot. And then I hunted it for like 3 more years after that and barely saw a deer for 3 years after that. And it had just changed. The pattern had changed. There were some blowdowns that kind of blocked some of the runways where they used to come up onto this island out in the swamp. And it just changed. And I really liked that spot because it was a great sanctuary. There was tons of deer movement in there. Shot a good buck there. So you naturally tend to like those spots. There's nothing wrong with it if the sign dictates that it's still good. But you can't just assume that it's going to be good every year or every time you hunt it. You could hunt a spot in October 20th and it could be on fire. And you could hunt it 10 days later and the deer could be gone. It could be ghost town. So you really have to rely on that immediate information, that most recent intel. You got to get boots on the ground. I mean, you can have a spot you like, a pre-planned spot, which is like what I have down in Illinois. And those are going to kind of be my starting spots. So like morning number 1, going in blind in the dark, I'm probably going to go to a spot that I know. I'm going to go to a tree that I've already kind of picked out. And then after that hunt, it's time to walk. It's time to move and probably into new areas too. I want to get as much intel as possible. So I think that just helps get the odds in your favor. I've been trying to do that with hunting here in Wisconsin this season. After scouting this area for the last couple of years, I just don't want to get tied to certain locations because even the best spots change. The movement through them changes. When deer relate to them changes. So you got to take it upon yourself to be open-minded. Don't close yourself off and stick to the spots that are just comfortable, that are just the things you already know. You got to have that growth mindset. You got to be out there willing to make changes, willing to try new things, um, both in your spots and the way you hunt them. Just because you go in one way to the stand doesn't mean that's the best way to go in. There are multiple ways to get into a spot, and some might seem crazy or too hard or too long, but that doesn't make them the worst way to access. That doesn't make them inefficient. You really got to do your best to understand the big picture of things. So that's kind of the stories I wanted to share. 2 success stories. One that I hunted a stand for 3 years after killing a buck, hoping that circumstances would repeat, and they didn't. So that's just a little tidbit there as you guys get into some rut hunting coming up here. Things are going to really start turning on. People are going to be hitting the woods. Don't be afraid to change your plans. And that's not even just based off deer movement. You're going to run into guys out in the woods. You're going to run into neighbors who are doing this and doing that. You're going to have plan B or plan C or sometimes plan D. So don't be afraid to scout with your stand on your back or just scout and hunt off the ground. Don't be afraid to try things that are out of your comfort zone. That's sometimes what it takes to put yourself in the best position. So keep an open mindset. Good luck out there as things start ramping up. I hope you guys have some really good luck. If you have any action, feel free to send a message or an email or an Instagram message with your success and maybe your story to the OKS Hunter. And we'd love to share the celebration with you. So good luck out there with the bow season here as things start to ramp up. I'll be in Illinois when this airs. So if you're listening to this on Monday morning, wish me luck. Cross your fingers for me. It'll be my second to last day. We'll hunt Tuesday morning, and then we'll probably head back midday. So hopefully I've got a good story to share for you. The next episode of Dropping Pins, I am hoping to do an episode at deer camp in Illinois. So I'm gonna try to make this work down there. There's not much for cell reception. Definitely no Wi-Fi. So I don't know if I can make it work, but the idea is my 2 buds who are going down with me, Adam and Dave, I kind of want to do like 2 days of hunting and then sit down one night in the little cabin we got and record a podcast on how it's been going, what we've been doing, what the strategy is, and just and just kind of talk about what we've been seeing down there. So that's the plan for the next episode. Sorry I didn't have a guest tonight. Hopefully you got something from one of those stories. They're stories that are near and dear to my heart. Those experiences, those learning moments. So hopefully they can help you in some way. So yeah, bottom line, don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be married to spots just because of something that happened previously. Just because it happened once does not mean it's going to happen again. It can, but be ready, be open to maneuver and pivot and just adapt to the changes, because they're going to be a lot. They're going to be a lot. So, all right. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great season. Good luck out there. Be safe. Have fun. And we'll talk to you soon.